Viewpoints on the talk station FM 107 AM 1240. I've been discussing at length topics of education, and joining us this afternoon, former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Newt Gingrich. And we're going to chat with him about the issue of, full employment, the efforts on part of this administration to establish opportunities for folks as they meander through the morass of federal regulations and a declining economy. So all that coming up here this afternoon with our guest. And with that, we welcome former Speaker Newt Gingrich. And with that, Mr. Speaker, welcome. Thank you.
Listen, it's great to be with you and have a chance to talk about ideas and talk about what needs to be done for America.
You're going to tackle the issue of for-profit institutions and the challenges they face. But before we do, I'd like you to just sort of a little background on what's happening in Washington, D.C. We're going to bring up the topic of gainful employment regulations. I think you've had some experience in Washington in the environs of Congress, and I have to ask, Mr. Speaker, what is it about Washington that there's this need to, for all intents and purposes, micromanage every aspect of our lives, specifically education? We'll get into that. But what is it about Washington that is this driving desire to want to control every aspect of our lives?
Well, you have three groups. You have the bureaucrats who like power and believe that they have been empowered to run your life, even if they've never been in your state, never been in your city, never been in your industry. And so they just, they personally enjoy the level of power they have, and they feel it's their duty to exercise that power, even if they don't know anything about what they're doing. Second, you have Washington lobbyists who think, the busier Washington is and the more important Washington is, the better their career future, the more they can charge and the more business they'll get. And then third, you have with President Obama a very liberal ideology which actually believes the American people are too stupid to govern themselves and they need people in Washington making decisions for them.
You make mention of that, and I forewarned you that I'm having recently read your book, Breakout, by the way, The Epic Political Battle of Our Age. And this actually segues beautifully into this conversation. You note here, it has been said that the future has a publicist, but the past has a lobbyist. And it's almost as if there's this crying desire, if you will, to grasp hold of past activities and not let go of them. And that is really kind of the topic of both your book, Breakout, and your conversation today related to the efforts to establish gainful employment, the new gainful employment regulations. We tend to want to fix the world as we see it, not as it will automatically and entrepreneurially develop. Am I correct on that?
Well, that's right. And our listeners can go to www.opportunitydenied.org, and they'll see the details of what you and I are talking about. The fact is the Department of Education has issued an 840-page proposed regulation, which would in effect cut hundreds of thousands of people off of a chance to get educated, particularly hit African Americans, Latinos, and single mothers hard, because there are a lot of people out there who want to do better, they want to get a better job, they want to get a better education, but they can't afford to stop, go to some kind of full-time learning, and there are a number of places that offer them part-time education and a chance to move up to become a nurse or to become a pharmacist or to get a job as a real estate salesperson. And a lot of those jobs will be killed by Obama's Department of Education because they're so deeply anti-free enterprise and anti-small business, and they've adopted this 840-page regulation in order to stop people from being able to go to these private sector companies and get this kind of an education outside the control of government. So it's one more example of what you're talking about. There's this passionate desire by the Washington bureaucrats to run our lives, and I think it has a devastating impact on all of us and puts us in a situation where we have a much weaker future with fewer jobs, lower incomes, and less freedom. And that's why I've become so involved and I'm so committed and urge people to go to opportunitydenied.org because I think it does give them a real sense of how serious this problem is.
Also, I would wonder if it isn't an issue of protecting institutions. And, we get into this debate and discussion about for-profit institutions for higher learning, for any educational activity. And I have to wonder, basically as a result of recent activities of all things, the NCAA on the efforts to pay students to play football and basketball and other revenue-producing sports and at major educational institutions, and many of them state-run. This whole aspect of a for-profit education in comparison to what has been perceived as the not-for-profit institutions, such as University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill or NC State or any other institution, is this a protective effort and device so as to remove competition in the area of education?
I think that's part of it, but part of it's a deep ideological opposition to free enterprise and to small business. I think you have people in the Obama administration who just automatically dislike anything which is a for-profit business, even if it is successful, even if it is able to get the job done. And the tragedy here is, there are great public universities in North Carolina. I mean, NC State, the University of North Carolina, for that matter, Duke University. There are all sorts of folks. My son-in-law was at one time the head tennis coach at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. So I'm very aware of great institutions. That's really not what this is aimed at. The question is for the person who maybe doesn't have a very good job, they don't have a very good income, they need to find some place that fits their schedule, lets them continue to work, but lets them learn while they're working. And that's where these particular innovative private sector schools have done a really outstanding job. And there are hundreds of thousands of folks, single mothers, African Americans, Latinos, who are not in a position to stop everything else they're doing and go to school full time. And they're the folks who are going to be hurt the most by this kind of 842-page regulation. And if you just ask yourself as a matter of common sense, anybody that requires an 842-page regulation, there's something profoundly wrong.
I'm smiling when you say that. I mean, it's obviously designed to confuse and, in fact, to overwhelm the opposition. Our guest this afternoon, former Speaker Newt Gingrich, we're talking about his efforts on behalf of the for-private education sector. And, Mr. Speaker, I've got to go back to your book here for a moment, Breakout, in which you note the pioneers of future, prison guards of the past, and the epic battles that will decide America's fate. Granted, you're talking about a variety of other activities, but you focus on education. And in this book, your book, Breakout, you spend a good portion of the time just focusing on the public education sector. And I go back to my question to you a few moments ago about the issue of protecting that sector. I said that earlier, related to secondary or higher education, colleges. But even you point out in the book, Breakout, the fact that there are institutional efforts to restrain the private sector from getting engaged in education. You're talking about this related to opportunity denied and the fact that there are private sector efforts to provide this education. There is a certain degree, though, and you point this out in your book, Breakout, there's a certain degree of institutional protection. Is there not?
Well, there is, and it's unfortunate because what we want to do is make sure that every young person has access to the best possible learning at the lowest possible cost, and has a chance to learn what they need to know. And when I would say to all of our listeners, by the way, if you go to the Khan Academy, K-A-H-N, the Khan Academy was developed by an entrepreneur in order to teach his nieces and nephews math and science when they were living in separate cities. And so he put these ideas and lessons on YouTube, and they were so successful. They're 6 or 8 minutes per lesson, aimed at one idea per lesson. He is today got some 10 million people visit Khan Academy every month. It is totally free, and it allows you, let's say you didn't do very well in math when you're in high school and now you want to go to college, you can literally take all of your remedial math program at the Khan Academy at no cost. That's an example. There's another site people can go to called Duolingo, D-U-O Lingo, that teaches 7 different languages for free. just another example of what's possible. So there are a lot of very exciting things developing out there, and we need to recognize that we want to encourage young people, and there's a brand new approach called blended learning, where you have the teacher in the classroom working with the internet, and so you get the best of both worlds. You get the knowledge of the teacher, the human interaction with the teacher, but you're really opening the child up to all the knowledge available on the internet, and it's blended learning may be a key part of our future.
Our guest, former Speaker Newt Gingrich, joining us this afternoon to talk about an effort by the current administration, the Obama administration, to control access of education and basically to shut down for-profit institutions. I'm looking forward to more conversations with our guest, Speaker Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, this whole issue of, you mentioned the Khan Academy a few moments ago. Here's a former hedge fund manager who is apparently doing quite well for himself, has found a new mission, if you will, a new focus in education. Yet there are institutions, NEAs, National Education Association, that have opposed any effort on part of Khan Academy. Duolingo, you mentioned just a moment ago. This is yet an example. And now we have this effort on the part of private sector to provide an education. By the way, Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that the private sector better understands the talents and the knowledge necessary for future employees and future students. Do they not?
Well, I think very often and we've talked a lot about getting to an apprenticeship program where companies that want to hire people actually get directly involved in helping them learn, so that they are trained and prepared to do the job the company needs. I mean, companies will tell you all over America that there's a shortage of the kind of workers they need, and that's a very real concern of American companies, is to try to find some ability to get people who are trained in the skills that particular company needs. And I think you're going to see a growing interest in apprenticeship programs. So people actually are getting educated for a job. And in this economy, knowing that you're going to leave school to go into a job is a big deal.
Looking at some recent stories about some of the institutions of which I mentioned earlier, UNC Chapel Hill, Duke, and other colleges, so often would they have a curriculum and courses that, quite frankly, aren't that conducive to providing life-sustainable activities and knowledge. Whereas I would argue, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that in the for-profit institutions, they have to respond to the marketplace. Otherwise, they're out of business. Your thoughts?
Right. I mean, the one great virtue, and all of us experience this in our lives, the difference between being a customer and being a client is, as a customer, if you don't get what you want, you go someplace else.
Right.
As a client, you're trapped by the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy defines what you're going to get. You don't. So there's a huge advantage, I think, to having a customer relationship where you're in charge and you're in control, and it really does make a big difference.
And in fact, it is the customers that will make the decision as to the success or failure of any institution, be it education or, for that matter, a restaurant. Mr. Speaker, the other issue, of course, related to the concept of for-profit institutions is, and we've seen this with a lot of stories of late, for example, the indebtedness that so many students face when they glom on to federal education programs, is the funding for private sector education. The government also has certain controls over that basically put some of the private institutions at a disadvantage, do they not?
Well, they do. I think there's no question that what we want is a level playing field, and people who go to opportunitydenied.org will see how the Department of Education would create an unfair, non-level playing field. The reason we want a level playing field is that we want people to have a genuine right to choose. Imagine if the government ran cafeterias and they wanted to make sure that you couldn't go to Starbucks or go to McDonald's, so they rigged the game to the disadvantage of those companies, so you found it very expensive and very difficult to go to them. That's the sort of problem we have that we're dealing with right now in terms of this proposed 840-page regulation. I am for the student and the process of learning being at the center of everything we're doing. I am not for or against government-run schools. I'm not for or against private schools. I am for people having an ability to pick what they think helps their lives, what will help them get a better job, and I think that's got to be the approach we take.
I would state to encapsulate that remark, Mr. Speaker, and that is you have this novel concept of competition within the area of education, which is something that arguably there's if you will, a cabal opposed to competition within education. Please feel free to correct me on that, but I've been a big critic of the current institution of education in the sense that there's been this hesitancy to look for any kind of innovation, any kind of entrepreneurial area. And I'm looking right now at something I'm looking at here. The truth is that institutions in the country, whether public or for-profit or nonprofit, and the nonprofit education system, I have to question, just to be, as an aside, could meet the gainful employment regulations' arbitrary standards. The average four-year public school would fail with students graduating with a 12% debt-to-earnings ratio. I mean, there is no effort now, in spite of that, to really look for innovation.
Well, I think that's right, and I think it's a tragedy for the students. You know, the great problem we have is that the cost of higher education has gone up and up and up. Mm-hmm. You end up borrowing the money in order to pay the tuition and pay the room and board and pay the student fees, and then you may end up in a situation where you can't find a job, and so you can't pay back the student loan you develop. I mean, all these things are coming together in a way that's, I think, very, very unacceptable. I think that it's important for us to rethink it. My goal, in part, is to give you and your children the option of having a lower cost, better system, more convenient, more available. Some of it's going to be on the internet. Some of it's going to be face-to-face. There are all sorts of solutions, but I want to open the system up, and that's why I wrote the book Breakout, was to suggest that opening up the system, allowing us to encourage the pioneers of the future, being aware of the folks who are acting as prison guards of the past trying to keep us trapped, I think will lead to a much healthier, more profitable, more employed, better jobs America for the future, and will also lead to a lower-cost health system and lower-cost government in ways that could be very useful.
For those just joining us, just to remind you, our guest, Speaker Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, and also New York Times best-selling author, most recent book I've read here, Breakout. By the way, Mr. Speaker, I have an autographed copy. Thank you very much. Back to the issue. What is it about the private sector, the whole concept of entrepreneurism, the whole concept of, if you will, that dastardly word profit is so antithetical to the thinking process in Washington, D.C.?
Look, there's no question that there are some people who are ideological liberals who are just opposed to profit under any circumstance. They'd be opposed to Starbucks making a profit. They're opposed to McDonald's making a profit. They think that making a profit is somehow bad, yet you know and I know and our listeners know that that's part of the system which has made America the wealthiest, most successful country in the world with the widest range of choices. I mean, nobody forces you to go to Starbucks rather than to McDonald's for your coffee. Nobody forces you to go to either one if you want to go to the store and buy your own coffee and make it yourself at home. The goal of America should be the maximum choice at the lowest cost and the greatest convenience for all Americans in virtually everything. And if we could unify around that, and that's what part of the purpose of my writing the book Breakout, I think we'd be a much more successful country.
To wrap things up, and I thank you for your time this afternoon. Again, Speaker Newt Gingrich, our guest this afternoon. We're talking about, I'm bringing in intentionally, and he's been very gracious to allow me to do so, mentioning his book, Breakout, Pioneers of the Future. Mr. Speaker, this is related to education, and we've seen this in relationship to culture and social events and activities, any number of institutions. I'm just going to posit this comment and get your response to this. The last bastion, if you will, of free enterprise is education, and it seems to me it's the key goal of those that wish to control every aspect of our lives. And we're seeing that, of course, in primary education. You mentioned the Khan Academy and Duolingo. But we're seeing it now in the higher levels of education as well, where there is a pushback by government to allow private sector involvement in education. It seems to me that this is probably, if you will, the ultimate goal of a liberal and controlling an organization. Look,
the same people in the Obama administration who would like to control health care They would like to control education. They would like to control every aspect of your life. Those folks are the ones who were behind writing this 840-page memo, regulation, which people can see if they want to go to www.opportunitydenied.org. And we just need to understand we're in a genuine struggle over whether you get to be a free person making decisions and being responsible, or whether you are going to be trapped into doing what bureaucrats want you to do when they want you to do it. I think it's a huge issue, and I think it's one that's going to be with us a long time. And as always, it's always great to talk with you because you cover so many issues and you deal with so many very important ideas, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk about these ideas.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for being with us today. I look forward to future conversations. Best of luck in this endeavor and continuing to broaden our perspectives. Thanks again, sir.
Thank you. Take care.